Good morning. Today's daf is daf Yud Chet of Masechet Menachot. Let me share my screen and we will get started. I'll note that Kenneth asked yesterday a question at the end of the daf, end of our discussion about the halachot associated with consuming blood. And so let me just note a couple of things about that. We first is that the prohibition of eating blood and the fact that it's a punishment of kares is found in Vayikra Perek Zayin Pasuk Kaf Vav, where it says that anybody is going to be cut off in connection with that. And then with respect to the fact that you also get lashes, that's going to be found in the Rambam, 18th chapter of Hilchos Sanhedrin, first halacha. So that should give the answers. So those were the two things that we had from takeaways from yesterday. Now, yesterday we learned the opening mission of the third chapter of Maseches Menachot, and in it we saw the following dispute. The Tanna Kama says that if one performs kamitza on a mincha with the intent to eat something that you're not supposed to eat or burn something that you're not supposed to burn, it is a valid sacrifice. So not only is it not pigul, but it's not even not kosher. And Rabbi Eliezer says, no, it's not kosher. And so in the Gemara, Rav Asi provided a Torah basis for it. He explained the pasuk that suggested that that was the reason. And so as a result, Rav Zera asked, why is the offering only invalid? If in fact you're going to tell me that that there's a scriptural source to it in the context of pigul, if the person is planning to eat something they're not supposed to eat beyond the relevant time, it should be pigul. And then if one were to eat the korban after the korban becomes pigul, that would mean that the person would be subject to kares. Why are we only talking about a psul as opposed to kares? And so Rav Asi then explained there's a machlokas among Tanoim as to whether the invalidity is biblical or rabbinic, and he cited a brisa with the following two disputes. It had dispute number one was that if you slaughtered an offering with an intent to drink its blood tomorrow, to burn some of its meat tomorrow, or to eat some of its sacrificial parts the next day. Again, all of these are about time, so it's potentially pigul, but note that the blood that's going to be consumed and the sacrificial parts that are going to be consumed are things that are supposed to be burned, and now you're eating them. And the meat that is supposed to be eaten, the intention is to burn it. So you're not doing what you're supposed to do. And so as a result, the Tanna Kama says that this is a valid sacrifice because your bad intention is not actually one that has material impact. And the Rabbi Eliezer says, no, it does have a material impact, and it's invalid, the sacrifice. Now, when we had a subsequent, then that same brisa also included the following, where it said, what happens if instead of intending to drink the blood tomorrow, you only plan to leave it over for tomorrow? So Rabbi Yehuda there says it's invalid. And Rabbi Elazar, again, it's important to clarify that that's not Rabbi Eliezer, but Rabbi Elazar, another Tana, says that here too, Rabbi Eliezer says it's invalid and the rabbis say valid. And Rav Asi said, listen, what is Rabbi Yehuda thinking? Meaning, when Rabbi Yehuda says it's invalid, is he thinking that that's the Tanna Kama's point of view? That can't be, because if the Tanna Kama says that holding it over to drink tomorrow it's going to be valid, where not only are you leaving it over for tomorrow, but you're thinking about drinking, so then for sure, if all you're thinking about is leaving it over for tomorrow, it should be valid. So as a result, it must be that Rabbi Yehuda is describing Rabbi Eliezer's position. But if Rabbi Yehuda is saying that Rabbi Eliezer would say it's invalid and the Tanakama would say that it's valid, that's exactly what Rabbi Elazar says. So what's the difference between them? So Rav Asi explains that the difference between them is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, when Rabbi Eliezer said in the beginning of this brisa that it's invalid, it means not only is it invalid, but it's subject to kares. Whereas Rabbi Elazar would say, no, everything is just invalid, nothing is subject to kares. And so Rav Asi offers this understanding of this brisa as proof that there is a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar as to whether or not there is kares in the case like in our Mishnah, where somebody is thinking about eating something that's not supposed to be eaten or burning something that's not supposed to be burned beyond the relevant time frame, and so as a result, Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Elazar would say that it's just invalid, where according to Rabbi Yehuda, it would be not only invalid, but it would also even be pigul and subject to kares. And so as a result, right, so that would help us understand that Rav Asi's explanation is the accurate explanation, according to Rabbi Yehuda, for why Rabbi Eliezer says that it's invalid in our Mishnah, because of the various psukim. So as we pick up with the second to last word on the third line from the bottom of Yud Zayin Mabet, so the Gemara is now going to reject Rav Asi's approach. And it says, no, it's not true. That is not the necessary interpretation that you have to give to the brisa. Again, if you're trying to prove something and you're using a brisa to prove it, you have to give the only reasonable explanation for that brisa. But I'm going to give you another explanation of that brisa, and that explanation would show that in fact you don't need to say that there's a machlokas about whether or not Rabbi Eliezer, when he says invalid, it means also pigul and kares. Rather, the kuli alma kares leika. Everybody agrees that there is no kares, and it is only a invalidity when we said in our Mishnah and when we talk about this brisa. V'hacha gimel machlokos b'davar. And in this brisa that Rav Asi cited, there are really three different opinions. And how do the three opinions go? We have the following. So Tanakama, now it's a little confusing because the Tanakama, there's two levels of Tanakama in this as a result of saying that there's a three-way dispute. There's the Tanakama, who are the rabbis who argue with Rabbi Eliezer, but there's also the Tanakama who is now describing the machlokas between the Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer. So we'll use, although on the screen you'll see that it says the Tanakama in the machlokas in my introduction, we're going to refer to them as the Chachamim. So the Tanakama or the Rabbanan. So there's the opinion number one in the brisa is that the machlokas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer. So Tanakama savar b'hanach pligi, that only with respect to these three situations, drinking the blood tomorrow, burning some of its meat tomorrow, and eating the sacrificial parts tomorrow, that's where the Chachamim say valid, Rabbi Eliezer says invalid. But when it comes to leaving it over, divrei kol kasher, the Tanakama, who's the one who quotes the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer, is going to tell you that, you know what? Everybody would say that if you leave the blood, if your intention is only to leave the blood over, so then it would be certainly kosher. Because let's think about it. From the perspective of pigul, right, you're referring to the blood. And you're not doing a consumption of the blood, so it's totally not in the category of pigul. And And let's take a look at Rashi. Dekuli al sorry. V'hacha gimel machlakopa davar tanakama savar b'hanach pligi. That the Rebbe Eliezer, this is the last Rashi on Yud Zayin Amabet. The Rebbe Eliezer Gazar atu machshava kedarko dahavi pigol. So Rabbi Eliezer says, you know what? The reason. So again, according to the Tanakama, here's the reasoning for the machlokas. If in fact you think about the wrong thing and doing it in the wrong time. So, for example, you think about eating something that's not supposed to be eaten, or burning something that's not supposed to be burned at the wrong time. So Rabbi Eliezer will say that the rabbis made a gezerah because they are concerned that maybe you will have that same thought, namely consuming something at the wrong time or burning something at the wrong time, with respect to something that is supposed to be either consumed or burned respectively. And so as a result, in this case, where you had the wrong thought, we'll make a gezerah and just say it's usser, because we don't want you to come to have the thought about the thing that's supposed to be burned or that's supposed to be eaten, have a thought about eating something that's supposed to be eaten or burning something that's supposed to be burned. So therefore, if you were to think about eating something that's supposed to be burned or burning something that's supposed to be eaten, we'll say that it's prohibited, because we don't want you to think about something that, again, we don't want you to think the right thought in the wrong way. So Hilka Gazar Bishalo Gedarko. So as a result, that's why we set a gzera when you do it the wrong way. Dahavi psul, it's going to just be invalid. Avalahaniach divrei hakol kshera. But when you comes to just leaving over the blood, everybody would say that that's kosher, because the lo asra Torah ella machshavas achila ushtiya de beklal achila who that the only thing that the Torah prohibits is a thought with respect to consumption, either eating or drinking. Drinking is part of eating, and so as a result, when you're just thinking about leaving over, that's not a potential pigel thought. And so as a result, and it's not even an usser thought, because it's not going to create an isser, because you're not, even if you were to think about doing it in the wrong place or whatever, it's not, that's not going to be, and here we're talking about just doing it at the wrong time, it's not going to be a problem. Umiktsas damo atukola damo lo gazrinan. And you know what? Although it would be usser, according to the Torah, if you were to decide to leave over all of the blood, because then you're saying you're not going to do any kind of service with the blood, even though it would be the sacrifice would be invalid. We are not so concerned that once you say you're going to leave over some blood, that you're going to then leave over all of the blood. And so as a result, we're not going to make a gezerah about that. And we'll see that other people are going to make a gezerah. So that's the Tanakama's understanding of the machlokas between the Chachamim and Rebbe Eliezer. And then there's Rebbe Yehuda's understanding, as we turn to Yud Chet Amud Aleph. Rebbe Yehuda savar b'hanach pligi, that, you know what, lahaniach divrei hakol psul, that when it comes to the first three, again, eating the blood the next day, burning the meat that's supposed to be eaten the next day, and eating the parts that are supposed to be burned the next day, that everybody agrees that that's a machlokas. That's the machlokas between the Chachamim and Rebbe Eliezer. But when it comes to leaving over the blood for the next day, well, then if all you do is leave over the blood, then everybody's going to say it's puzzle. One second, though, we had said that it seems like it's a kal v'chomer, that if the rabbis say that eating the blood is not going to result in a psul and it's going to be kosher, certainly leaving over some of the blood should be kosher. So my taima, what's the reason that everybody's going to say that it's puzzle? So gzeira mixes damo atu kol damo. So the concern is that the rabbis said, look, if you were to leave over all of the blood, well, then the sacrifice would be invalid. So if you have an intention to leave over even part of the blood, we're worried that you're going to come to leave over all of the blood. And so as a result, we're going to say that this is going to be invalid. B'chol damo psula do raisa. And if you were to leave over, if you were to even have an intention to leave over all of the blood, it would be a biblical prohibition. Titania, we have a brisa that shows that it would be a biblical prohibition, at least according to Rabbi Yehuda. So Amar Lahem Rabbi Yehuda said to the others who disagree with him, wouldn't you agree with me that if he actually left over all of the blood until tomorrow, it would be an invalid sacrifice? Of course you do. So so if you were to intend to leave it all over until the next day, it would also be puzzle. And so Rabbi Yehuda would then say that both the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer would agree to his logic that we would have, that everybody would say that it's going to be invalid because of the Gzeira. So also Rabbi Elazar Lameimar, and Rabbi Elazar says the third opinion now in our machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer is Afizo Rabbi Eliezer posa v'Chachamim makshim. It's a machlokes about 4 different subjects, and the machlokes, that the same machlokes that they have about eating the blood or eating the emurim or burning the meat. In all of those cases, that machlokas also applies to leaving over the blood. That if you were to leave over the blood, Rabbi Eliezer would say that it's invalid because we have a gzeira, that the rabbis are worried that you're going to come to leave over all of the blood. And the Chachamim would say, no, it's totally kosher because we don't make that gzeira. So as a result, our brisa now does not prove anything with respect to Rav Asi's position, and so as a result, that's going to be all fine. And so as a result, the bottom line is that we have not proven, or we've actually shown that it would be problematic to say that the explanation of Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah is that it's based on psukim. Rather, we have to say that when Rabbi Eliezer says invalid in our Mishnah, it's a rabbinic concern that if you were to say that it would be totally kosher, maybe you would come to have the pigel thought not about something that's not supposed to be burned or something that's not supposed to be eaten, but about something that's supposed to be burned or supposed to be eaten. And so as a result, that's the concern, that maybe you'll come to have that thought, you'll end up creating pigel, and so the rabbis say, we're going to say it's invalid, according to Rabbi Eliezer. All right, V'sava Rabbi Yehuda lahaniach midamo lemachar divrei hakol pasol. Well, one key element of what you've just said is that Rabbi Yehuda would say that everybody, even the Chachamim, would say that both the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer would say that if you intend to leave over some of the blood until tomorrow, the sacrifice becomes invalid. But Vahatanya, Amar Rebbe. So we're going to have now a story where Rebbe tells us what happened. Kishahalachti lematzot midosai etzel Rebbe Elazar ben Shamua. When I went to, pull out my measures by Rebbe Elazar ben Shamua. What does it mean to pull out my measures? To drain my measures? Rashi explains first narrow line in Rashi, limtzos midosai leida mitzui talmudai, to figure out to know where I am lacking in my measure of my learning, v'lishol sfikosai, and by asking to understand all of my uncertainties. And so that's what, so it means sort of effectively to figure out how we're going to fill up the knowledge that Rebbe was looking for. V'amrila, and some people say that he didn't say limatzot midosai, but rather limatzos midosav shel Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua. No, he was trying to, and it wasn't that he was Eitzel Rabbi Elazar, it was midosav shel, meaning that he was trying to understand and drain the measures of Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua. He was trying to learn everything that Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua knew more than he did. So, right, if you have sort of like two measurements next to each other, so then the higher one will help fill out the lower one. So what was it that was relevant that he learned? And how does that show that Rabbi Yehuda would say that there's a machlokes about leaving over blood? Because of the following: Matzati Yosef Habavli Yoshev Lefanav. I ran in, I saw that Yosef Habavli was sitting in front of Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua. Amar Lo, and Yosef said to Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua, Rebbe, hashochid es hazebach lahaniach midamo lamachar mahu. The exact question that we're thinking about. If somebody was slaughtering a sacrifice and they intend to leave over the blood for the next day, what's the halacha? So Amar Lo kasher, it's kosher, meaning that's the position of the Chachamim. So Arvis, Amar Lo kasher, he asked him again, and he said it was kosher at nighttime. Shachris, he asked him in the morning, Amar Lo kasher. Tzaharayim, he asked him again in the afternoon, Amar Lo kasher. Mincha, it came time to daven mincha, and so in the later in the afternoon, and he said, Amar Lo kasher elasha Rabbi Eliezer posel. No, it's kosher, but Rabbi Eliezer says it's puzzle. Tzahavu panav shel Yosef Habavli. Yosef Habavli face lit up. Amar Lo. So Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua said to him, Yosef, kimeduma ani shelo kivanu shmua seinu adata. It seems like I didn't really get you to have the right intention until now. Meaning, it wasn't as if we were aligned until now. So Amar Lo, Rebbe Hain, that's exactly right. Elisha Rebbe Yehuda Puzzle Shanali. I seem to remember that Rebbe Yehuda taught me that it was invalid. V'chazarti al kol talmudav ubikashti li chaver v'lo matzasi. I went and asked all of his students, and I tried to find somebody who would be a companion for me, meaning somebody else who also remembered the same teaching, but I couldn't find anybody. Achshav shishanisa li pasul hechazarta li avedasi. Now that you've taught this to me, you've returned my teaching, meaning now I know that what I'm remembering is correct. So Zalgu Einav Dmos shel Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua. Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua's eyes flowed with tears. Amar Ashreichem Talmidei Chachamim. So fortunate are you, this Torah students, Shedivrei Torah Chavivin Aleichem Bayoser, that you so love learning Torah. And Kara Alav Hamikra, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua said, you know what? This pasuk applies. Ma ahavti zoresecha kol hayom hisivchasi. How I love your Torah all day. It's what I talk about. So now that was the brisa. I'm sorry, no, there's a little bit more of the brisa. So Hamipnei, and now Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua tells Yosef Habavli, Hamipnei shel Rabbi Yehuda b'no shel Rabbi Eli, v'Rabbi Eli talmido shel Rabbi Eliezer. Why was it that Rabbi Yehuda taught you the fact that it was prohibited? Is because Rabbi Yehuda is the son of Rabbi Eli, and Rabbi Eli is the student of Rabbi Eliezer. So lefikach shana lecha mishnas Rabbi Eliezer, and that's why he would teach you the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Now, 1 second, what did Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua just say? That this is only the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to the explanation that we just gave, this position is not only the position of Rabbi Eliezer. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's also the position of the Chachamim. So now, if you're going to tell me that Rabbi Yehuda really believes that everybody is going to be say that it's usser, that it's invalid, that it's puzzle, excuse me, that my hechazarta liavedasi. What does he mean when he said when Yosef Abavli, if that's what he taught Yosef Abavli also, meaning of course Rabbi Yehuda, if Rabbi Yehuda believes that everybody agrees, not only Rabbi Eliezer but also the Chachamim believe that if you were to leave over the blood, it would be usher, it would be, excuse me, puzzle. So then he should have taught that to to Yosef Abavli. And if he taught that to Yosef Abavli, why is Yosef Abavli telling Rabbi Lazar ben Shamua that he returned to lost teaching? Because when Rabbi Lazar ben Shamua was teaching it, he was teaching it as a machlokus between the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer. So Iyu plugta ka'amar, right? Rabbi Elazar ben Shua was telling it to Yosef ben Habavli as a dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, whereas Rabbi Yehuda supposedly taught it to him that everybody would say that it's invalid. So Elamai kasher Rabbi Eliezer posel asne. So 1 second though, so the response back is, so what are you going to tell me? You're going to tell me that what was happening was when Rabbi Yehuda taught this to Yosef Habavli, he taught it as a machlokes, where Rabbi Eliezer would say that it's invalid, and the Chachamim would say that it's valid, that it's kosher. Ihachi my hamipnei. If in fact he was teaching it as a machlokes, why would Rebbe Elazar ben Shamua go out of his way to explain the fact that Rabbi Yehuda was teaching the law according to Rabbi Eliezer? You don't need ananami plugta masninan. He himself was teaching Rabbi Eliezer's position. There's no need to explain why he was teaching Rabbi Eliezer's position. Really, in fact, Rabbi Yehuda taught Yosef Abavli and believes that, in fact, everybody agrees that it's invalid if you leave over blood. Not only Rabbi Eliezer, but even the Chachamim. What does Rabbi Yosef? What does Yosef Habavli mean when he says that Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua has returned to lost teaching? It means the hadar le'miya shum paslus ba'olam. It's the point is that at that moment he couldn't find anybody who said it was puzzle, and so when Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua taught at least that Rabbi Eliezer says that it's puzzle, it was showing that maybe he could actually have had the teaching that Rabbi Yehuda had, and so that was what gave him the benefit of returning that knowledge that he now was confident that he knew what his teacher had taught him. Okay, so...
But he's saying that everyone, in his teaching, he was saying that everyone agreed that it was puzzle?
Exactly. Exactly. And so as a result, we no longer have, because we've now offered an alternative explanation for the brisa that Rav Asi cited, as a result, Rav Asi's position is not accepted. And in fact, we say that in the Mishnah, we're going to say that the position of Rabbi Eliezer of saying it's invalid is a rabbinic prohibition, and it's a rabbinic prohibition that is based on a concern that here the person thought about a piggle thought about something that's not supposed to be eaten or something that's not supposed to be burned. And we're worried that the person's going to have the pickle thought about something that's supposed to be eaten or supposed to be burned and doing that thing with it. And so as a result, that's why we're going to say that according to Rabbi Eliezer, the rabbis would have prohibited, would have said that the sacrifice is invalid.
So how do we even have a discussion or a thought that there was a group or somebody or a Rav or Rebbe that entertained a disagreement, that there was a machloket, if indeed we say that everyone agreed?
I don't understand the question.
Yeah, that's why I was getting a little bit lost here, because we still had an opinion. It seemed that there was some side that didn't agree with this, and yet
yes, there are three different views
that everyone agrees. So then,
that's why I have it on the screen, because it is a little confusing. So there are three different views. So everybody agrees. Let's start with what everybody agrees with. Whether it's the Tanakama, Rabbi Yehuda, or Rabbi Elazar, everybody agrees that there's a machlokes with respect to eating blood the next day, burning meat the next day, and eating sacrificial parts the next day. Where the Chachamim would say kosher and Rabbi Eliezer would say invalid. Okay, that everybody agrees to. There's the machlokes, and it's a three-way machlokes. According to the Tanakama, when it comes to leaving over blood for the next day, he says that both the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer would say kosher. According to Rabbi Yehuda, both the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer would say pasul with respect to leaving over the blood for the next day. And according to Rabbi Elazar, just as they have the machlokes with respect to the first three items, drinking blood, burning meat, and eating sacrificial parts, they also have a machlokes with respect to leaving over the blood, where the Chachamim would say that it's kosher, and Rabbi Eliezer would say that it's pasul. So those are three different possible discussions between the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer with respect to leaving over blood. Either they all agree that it's kosher, they agree that it's pasul, or they agree or they disagree about it. Those are the three possibilities, and we have an opinion that goes with each of the three. Tanakama says kosher, Rabbi Yehuda says pasul, Rabbi Elazar says it's a machlokes. And so, as a result, we no longer have to use Rav Asi's interpretation of this brisa. We instead have a completely different interpretation of this brisa. And now, as a result, Rav Asi's proof goes away because we have an alternative interpretation of this brisa. And instead, what we're saying, in the end, we result, and this is the end result, it seems, that we say that according to Rabbi Eliezer, in our Mishnah, when he says that if you have the thought about eating something that's supposed to be burned or burning something that's supposed to be eaten at the wrong time, it is not pigul, but it is invalid because we're worried that you're going to have the thought about eating something at the wrong time that's supposed to be eaten, or burning about something at the wrong time that's supposed to be burned. And so that's the concern, and so that's why we have that opinion. Okay, so we go now to the next Mishnah, and the next Mishnah continues our discussion of various things that one can do wrong for a mincha and it still be kosher. So, but before getting to the Mishnah, it's worth noting the process for the pan and griddle mincha offerings, and I'll add some steps that are unique to other types of offerings as we go through them, so that if there were a different kind of offering, this is what would happen. So the first step is you put oil from a log of oil, right? You're going to, every mincha includes a log of oil. And so you're going to have some oil into your kli sharis. This is the kli sharis mixing bowl. Okay, so both of the vessels that we're going to use are kli shares, meaning that they're service vessels. But first one is going to be the mixing bowl. The second is going to be the bowl from which we'll call it the burning bowl, because everything in it is going to get burned. Okay, so in this mixing bowl, we then put the flour. That's step 2. Along with some water in order to make it dough. But we have to be careful because these are non-chametz sacrifices. And so as a result, we have to make sure it doesn't become chametz. We then add some additional oil and the agreements are mixed. This is the belila step. It's a mixture of the whole thing. And we're going to see that that's an important step that we're going to refer to. Then we fry that dough in the pan or griddle. Okay, certain oven-baked mincha offerings would then be smeared with oil. That would be the next step, but we're not dealing with them. We're dealing with the fried, the pancake offerings, so to speak. And the resulting cake is now you have like a dough, like I said, it's sort of like a pancake. So you have that cake is going to be broken into pieces because we need to still do the kamitza. So the remainder of the log oil is now added, and and that's referred to as yitzika. That's the pouring. Okay, and we're going to see that that's going to be a relevant step that we're going to talk about in this Mishnah. Then, so we now have the broken pieces of the pancake and the with the oil, and we're going to now put the komets of Lavona on top. Okay, and now we have the ready stuff. Okay, if in fact this were an Omer or Sota Mincha offering, so then the waving would happen at this point. It's now essentially ready for the kamitza, but we haven't yet done that, and so now the waving would happen. Then this mixing bowl, again, with it, that essentially has everything in it, is going to now be brought and touched to the southwest corner of the altar. That is the bringing close. Then, after that, the lavona is going to be moved to the side. Now, this doesn't have to be done right at the side of the altar. It can be done elsewhere. But the lavona is going to move to the side, and the kamitza is done. And we saw in I think it was the last parak, how the kamitza exactly is done. And then the kometz is placed, that kamitza, after you've done the kamitza, what you have is a kometz, and that kometz is now placed in a new klishares, and the lavona is removed from the original klishares and added to the kometz. All right, and now the kometz with the lavona is going to be brought to the altar. We're going to add some salt to the kometz, and now the entire thing is burned. The lavona, the kometz, the salt, everything is now burned on the altar. Okay, so with that background, we can now go through our Mishnah in detail. So,
that's the ideal situation, right?
What was that?
That's the ideal situation.
Yes, that's
because
exactly
we
right.
did talk earlier, and I raised this point yesterday, day before, where we might burn the komets or the lavona separately in a whole discussion.
Correct. And we saw, right? We've discussed the possibility of burning the komets separately, from the mincha komets separately from the komets of lavona. So that's exactly right. You're 100% right. That this is the ideal. And it's important to note that when we talk about the ideal, that is the mitzvah element. But just because it is a mitzvah, a commandment to do it in this way, does not mean that each of the steps are mi'akev, that they would prevent, that if failure to do them would prevent it from being a good korban. And that's exactly what our Mishnah is doing. We sort of already saw earlier how you can burn the kamitza separate from the lavona, and it could be either order because there isn't a prerequisite to one of them. So as a result, you're absolutely right that that's a very analogous to what we're covering in this Mishnah. So lo yatzak, you didn't pour, and Rashi says hainu yitzika achrona. This is the second of the last pouring. The betchila. Because in the beginning, no saint shemen bekli. The first you put the oil in, v'achar kach solas, and then you put the flour, ubolel, and then you have oil and you mix it all up. V'chozer v'yotzik shemen, and then the last step is to add the rest of the log shemen. V'haki mefarish b'parak elu menachos nikmatzos, and that's we're going to see this on daf ayin dalet amabet. And so as a result, this is step number 7 in our list. The remainder of the log oil is added. Now, so that's number 1. And we're going to see that in all of these cases, the end of our Mishnah is going to say it's all kosher. So that's why I began my note by saying the mincha is valid even if. So, lo bolo, you didn't mix. So that was, again, step number 3. And now we can see already, right, that these steps are not in order, and Tozos points that out. The steps are, in fact, not in order. Lo patat, if you didn't break it into pieces. Now, Rashi points out, lo patat, this is 1, 2, 3, 6 lines up from the bottom of Yud Chet Amud Aleph. Lo patat shenemar Patur ota patim. It specifically says, the Torah specifically says in Vayikra Perak Bet Pasuk Vav that you should break it into pieces. So va'af agav de minchas machavasu diksiv, and even though it was only written in connection with respect to the griddle mincha offering, hu adin lakol hamenachos hanafos tchila. That's true for all of the mincha offerings that are baked, beforehand. Kagon machavas umar cheshes umeafa, whether it is a griddle one, a pan one, or a oven baked one. Shekul on both eser, that each of them come 10 by 10, meaning that it's usually a 10 loaf grouping. Mitzvah lefotatan, and you're supposed to break them up. Kulan, the entire item. Va'achar kach chometz, and then you can do the kamitza. V'zeh, and in this case, im lo patat ela kedei kamitza. Here, what happened is you broke off little pieces of all of them so that those little pieces would enable you, right? A kamitza is not very big. With those little pieces that you took off the humongous big loaf would allow you to do the kamitza. So kasher, that's still kosher, even though the vast majority of the bread is essentially whole. All you did was break off a little few pieces from some of the bread. Keda amrinan be'elu menachos, as we're going to see in Daf Ayin Hayam and Bet. All right, so that is the next category. And then we say velo malach, if you didn't salt it, right? That's going to be step number 15 of our process. Velo hanif, or if you didn't wave it, well, that was back step number 9 in the process. Lo higish, or you didn't bring it near to the altar. That was step number 10 in the process, right? Oshapatatan pitim nerubos, or you broke it into big pieces, right? So take a look at Rashi, patata. So again, this is second to last of the medium narrow lines in Rashi, of the medium lines in Rashi. Patata, beginning of the line. La'achar afiatan. After it was baked, potatan, the komitz, you break it up and then you do the kamitza. Kedemafarish be'elu minachos, as we're going to see on Daf Ayin Hey and Aleph. Upatatan mirubot gdolot, and here what we mean is that you broke it into big pieces, or at least that's going to be one of the explanations that we're going to see in the Gemara. Yoter medina mefurish, you broke it into pieces that are larger than what you're supposed to. Be'elu minachos nikmatzos, as we're going to see on Daf Ayin Hey and Aleph. So, and what are you supposed to do? Mincha Yisrael. Kofel echad l'shnayim, v'shnayim la'arba. You fold it over once, right? It's a flat thing, so you can fold it over once, and then you fold it over again. So now you fold it into quarters, and that's the way you're supposed to break it. Meaning that it's supposed to be broken into effectively 4 pieces. And what did we do? Instead of breaking it into 4 pieces, we just folded it over. So it's broken into 2 large pieces. So even though these pieces are now very large, if you were to still do the kamitza and everything the way you're supposed to, it is still kosher. It's going to be still fine. V'lo mashkan, back into our Mishnah, right? Third to last word in the Mishnah. If you did not do the mashicha, meaning the smearing with oil, Rashi tells us this is only in connection with one thing. Otan hatu'unas mashicha. That's referring to those that need mashicha, because not everything needs to be smeared with oil. K'diksiv urikike matzot mishuchim b'shem. That in Vayikra Perek Zayin, Pasuk Yud Bet, it says unleavened wafers, the rikike that are smeared with oil. So that's specifically the mincha offering that has the smearing with oil. Most of the mincha offerings do not. So my lo yatsa.
Now you brought a list of an ordered list of that should take of the
of
process,
all the different steps. Yes, I tried to be as
steps, ordered
inclusive
list
as
of
possible.
the various steps for the lavona and the what do you call it,
Correct.
chametza and the burning. Now the Mishnah is presenting, what if you didn't do this? What if you didn't do that? So forth.
Exactly.
Wouldn't it be more organized if the Mishnah would tell us. I don't know where you brought this from another source or the later.
I gather it from a
I
number
understand.
of different sources.
Right. So wouldn't it make sense
Yes.
if we were to
It-
see the order first in the Mishnah and then
uh,
learn what is not correct or what
one
could be,
one
what is
hundred
permissible,
percent.
not permissible? It's a little confusing for us suddenly to find out we didn't do this. This is okay. This is
Uh,
not okay.
uh, you are, I totally agree with you. On one level, this is the beauty of learning Gemara, because on some level, we're never going to understand this Mishnah until we've already learned the Gemara on Daf Hey, Ayin Hey, excuse me, on Daf Ayin Hey. So you're 100% right. But that's the way, the Gemara teaches things. It teaches us things that you're going to learn a couple, in Daf Yomi especially a couple weeks from now. But it's got pieces of the different things in different order. It On some level it helps with engagement because you have to pay attention. Because if you don't pay attention, you're like, where did this all come from? I don't understand. So I totally understand it. I don't have like a great answer other than what we are doing when we're learning Gemara is effectively reenacting the conversations that were had in the Beit Midrash, and we don't get an introduction usually, and so as a result, we're being dropped in the middle of the conversation. So I agree with you completely that wouldn't it be lovely to have a Mishnah like we have in Masechet Shabbos, where it lists all of the 39 Av Malachos, and we did that for all of the mincha offerings, 100%. Or if we had the Mishnayos like we have in the fifth parak of Zvachim, where it sort of like goes through things in detail, 100%, it would be amazing to have that. That's just unfortunately not always the way the Gemara works. But let's see if we can get a little bit further. So, my lo yatzak, what does it mean that you didn't pour? Does it mean ilema lo yatzak klal? If you're telling me that there was no oil at all, ikuvuk. What are you talking about? The Torah specifically says that oil needs to be poured. Elalo yatsa kohen elazar. So rather, it's telling us that a kohen didn't do it. It was done by a non-kohen. One second, ihachi lo balo nami. Are you going to tell me that if it was when we say that something wasn't done, it doesn't mean that it wasn't done at all. It means that it just wasn't done by a kohen. And so as a result, when it comes to not mixing, you're going to tell me lo balo kohen elazar, that it means that a kohen didn't mix it, but rather a non-kohen did. Halo bala klal psula, and if no one ever mixed it, you're going to tell me that it would be invalid. As we turn to Yudchadim Abat, that cannot be. V'hatanan shishim nivolim. If you had shishim, if you have 60 isaron of flour, that is something that is an amount that has the capability of being mixed with oil. Shishim ve'echad. But 61 cannot be mixed with the oil because you only have one log of oil. With so much flour, it's too much flour. And we asked about this ruling. Ki einan nivloim my havi. Who cares whether or not it's mixed? V'hatnan, because we learned in our Mishnah, v'habalo kshera, that if you don't mix lo balo kshera, that if you don't mix it, it's kosher. V'amar Rebbe Zera. So Rebbe Zera explained why was it that we need that the amounts are capable of being mixed. Kol haroy labila ein bila ma kevesbo. V'kol she'ein haroy labila bila ma kevesbo. That when it comes to the ability to mix it, as long as you have the ability to mix it, then you don't have to mix it. But if you have so much flour that you couldn't possibly mix it, well, then the mixing is necessary, and therefore it wouldn't be kosher even though you didn't mix it. So, one second. So, doesn't this show that this interpretation that Rabbi Zera is using for our Mishnah is clearly saying that no mixing happened? So, how can you tell me that when it comes to the pouring, we're saying that the pouring happened, it just wasn't by a Kohen, and when it comes to the mixing, you're saying that the mixing didn't happen at all? So, midi irya Hakadisa, Hakadisa. No, what are you talking about? That's not, these rulings don't connect to one another. Each one is independent. Lo Yatzak Kohen Elazar. When it says he didn't pour, it means that a Kohen didn't pour, but a non-Kohen did. Lo Bala, but when it says he didn't mix, Lo Bala Klal. It means it didn't mix at all. And so as a result, yes, it's a little confusing, but that's what our Mishnah means. So, oh, Shipatatan, Pitim, Merubos, Ksheros,
So is
Kshera.
there a shaila whether a coin or non-coin did the mixing?
Well, we're
I
going to
mean, it's a
see.
little bit off the topic, but I mean, because the Gemara mentions it as part of the
Yeah, yeah. So we're going to
Shakavatariya,
see that
is
basically anything, the last step that can be done by a non Kohen is the remaining pouring, and the pouring of the remainder of the log oil, which is the yitzika. That's step number 7. Everything before that can be done by a non Kohen. So the answer to your question is yes, a non Kohen can do the mixing. Okay. Oh, one second though. We said that if it's broken into large pieces. Now, one second. Hashda lopata klal kshera. Pitin merubos mi boy. One second. If you told me that you didn't have to break it all. So what does it mean that you didn't break it all? And of course we saw that you do break a little bit in order to be able to do the kamitza. But here you telling me now if you break it into big pieces, of course it's good, going to be fine. You had not breaking it all before, and now you're breaking it into big pieces. Of course that's going to be okay. No, not necessarily. My pitin merubos. Oh, so one possible answer is what do we mean by pitin merubos of which ordinarily would be translated as large pieces. No, shariba beftitin. No, it's just a lot of pieces, meaning you broke it up into 2 small pieces. V'ibayasema, or you could say la'olam pita merubos mamish, or it means literally large pieces. Umaudatema, what would I have thought? Hasam, when you only broke off little pieces of big loaves, de'ika Torah's chalos alayen, those big loaves still have the status as whole loaves. Aval hacha, the low Torah's chalos, the low Torah's petidanika. But now, when you only break each one into half, it's not a full loaf because you broke it into half, and it's not pieces because you didn't break it into quarters. So as a result, I would have thought that maybe that wouldn't be good at all. So Kamash Malan, so that's why the Mishnah tells us that actually if you break it into halves, even though it's larger pieces than you're supposed to, that's still going to be fine. So Lema Masnisim Deloka Rabbi Shimon. Maybe our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Shimon. Tanya Rabbi Shimon Omer Kol Kohen She'eno Modeh Ba'avoda, any Kohen who denies, does not admit to the services, meaning that they deny that Hashem commanded Kohanim specifically to engage in certain services. Ein lo chelik b'kahuna, he gets no portion of the sacrificial foods. Shenamar hamakriv es dam hashlamim ves hachelev mibnei Aharon ves hachelev mibnei Aharon. Shokayamin limana, that when it says that the person who offered the blood of the shlamim along with the fat, and it's one of the children of Aharon, meaning it's a Kohen, so then he gets the right thigh as his portion. So modeh ba'avoda yesh lo chelik b'kuna. So if you admit and agree that you're supposed to be doing the offering, so then you get to have the share of the portion. So she'ena modeh ba'avoda ein lo chelik b'kuna. And if you don't admit it, you don't get it. So ve'ein li elazo bilvad. So that I would understand with respect to the offering of the blood and the fat. But what about every other service? Menayin l'ravos chamesh esrei avodos. How do I know that there are 15 other services that also, if you were to deny, you'd be a problem? And Tosfos points out that there are many other services as well, but we're just listing some of them. Hayitzikos, and this is the most important one, is the one that we start with, the pouring. So here it seems to be saying that the pouring of the oil is a specific service that is supposed to be done by Kohanim. And that is different from our Mishnah, where we said that the Yitzika is being done by a non-Kohen. So vahablilos and mixing it, vahapetitot and breaking it, vahamalichos and salting it, vahatanufos and waving it. Again, when I said that that the mixing was something that the non-Kohen could do, I'm not following Rabbi Shimon. I'm following our Mishnah. So the saltings and the wavings, v'hagasha, and bringing it near to the mizbeach, v'hakamitzos, and taking the kamitza, v'haktaros, and burning malikos, and then doing malika on birds, v'hakabalos, and receiving the blood, v'hazos, and sprinkling the blood, v'hashka sota, and making the soto drink, meaning making the sota drink the water, the arifas egla, and cutting off the head of the egla arufa, the taras mitzora, and purifying the mitzora, unesios kapayim ben mivnim ben b'mechutz, or doing the nesios kapayim, the raising of hands, whether it's inside or outside the base of Mikdash. How do I know that all of these things you need to the Kohen needs to accept that they are specifically commanded from God to do these things? Minayin Talmud Lomar Mibnei Aaron, because it says the children of Aaron. Avodah hamasura livnei Aaron. It means any service that's been given to the children of Aaron, namely to the Kohanim. Kol Kohen she'ein moda ba ein lo chelek bakuna. Anyone who doesn't admit, he doesn't get a share. But what did we see? We saw that specifically there's a reference to Yitzika. So Yitzika shows that we're talking about pouring, and the pouring is not being done by a zar; it has to be done by a Kohen. So Amar Rav Nachman, lo kashya, kan b'minchas Kohanim, kan b'minchas Yisrael. Now we're two different minchas. One is the mincha of a Yisrael, one is a mincha of a Kohen. When minchas Yisrael, debas kamitza, you have to do a kamitza in connection with the mincha of Yisrael, because not all of it is burned. Everything that's left after you take the kamitza is going to be for the Kohanim to eat. Mikamitza ve'elach mitzvahs kahuna. From the kamitza and onward, that's where we're going to have a requirement for it to be done by a Kohen. Limit al yitzika ublila. And so that shows that when it comes to the pouring and the mixing, that's going to shikshera bizarre. It's going to be kosher with a non-Kohen. Minchas Kohanim. But when it comes to a mincha of Kohanim, delaba kamitzahi, that doesn't have any kamitza, mikara bayakuna. You need to use, Kohen needs to do everything from the very beginning. So Amrle Rava, Michde, 1 second, we can take a look at this and see that that's not the case. Minchas Kohanim mehecha israbi yitzika. How do I know that a mincha of a Kohen requires yitzika in the first place? Minchas Yisrael. We know it only from a minchas Yisrael. And mahasam kshera bizar, nami kshera bizar. And over there it's kosher with a non-Kohen. So too here it should be kosher with a non-Kohen. So again, the question remains. It seems like Rabbi Shimon disagrees, and you can't possibly answer that one is talking about a mincha of Yisrael and one's talking about a mincha of a Kohen. And Ika de Amri Amar Rav Nachman, there was a slightly different version of this conversation, where Rav Nachman, instead of saying that we're talking about a minchas Kohen, but rather lo kashya kan ben mikmotzos, the kan she'em mikmotzos. It's not about a minchas Kohen, but it's any mincha where you don't do a kamitza. Any mincha where you do a kamitza, so then everything before the kamitza can be done by a non-Kohen. But any mincha that has no kamitza, like a minchas Kohen, but also, sorry for not scrolling, but also a mincha, minchas nesachim, that is what Rashi points out, is also doesn't require any kind of kamitza. So then that would be something where the Kohen would need to do the whole thing. And again, Amrle Rava, Michti she'enik matzos mehecha israbi litzika. How do I know that the menachos that don't have kamitza require pouring of oil, the remainder of the oil, minik matzos, from the minchos that have kamitza taken? So kinik matzos mahasam ksheru bizar avhaki ksheru bizar. So as a result, ela machavarta masnisin deloka Rabbi Shimon. So it must be that our Mishnah is in fact not like Rabbi Shimon, and so as a result, Rabbi Shimon says that a Kohen needs to do those earlier steps. But our Mishnah says that no, Everything that is before the Kemitza can be done by a non-Kohen, and from the Kemitza and onward needs to be done by the Kohen. Now, Rabbi Shimon cited a verse to support the need for a Kohen to perform the pouring. So the Gemara asks how the rabbis know that pouring by a non-Kohen is valid. After all, Rabbi Shimon just provided a Torah source for his position that the pouring had to be done by a non-Kohen. So for that discussion, you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.